Algebra 1, Lesson 99, we are solving rational equations, which means that we need to be able to take these rational expressions that we've been working with and now be able to find answers to them. Now, there's a couple main ways that we can do this. We can, if we have something set up like a proportion, we can solve by using cross multiplication. Or we can solve using the least common denominator, and we're going to look at both of those methods. Now, just to make sure that we're clear on this, sometimes we can get a solution that doesn't actually satisfy the equation because it would cause the denominator to be 0, okay, which we can't have. So we always need to check our solutions because that could be a problem if we get one of those type of solutions. So let's solve with my rational proportion right here. So in this case, since it's set up like a proportion, I am going to solve using cross multiplication, which means I'm going to take, let me undo that really quick. All right, which means I am going to cross multiply here. So I'm going to take this 3, multiply it by x and minus 6, and then I'm going to do 5 times x, which means I'm going to get 5x is equal to 3 times the quantity, x minus 6. Now I write it like that just so that we can remember that 3 has to be multiplied by both of those different parts. So then we can go ahead and solve to say I'm going to expand and get 5x is equal to 3x minus 18. I am going to subtract 3x on each side to get 2x is equal to negative 18. So x is equal to negative 9. So we plug back in our solution just to make sure it doesn't cause a denominator to be 0. So we have 3 over negative 9 on the first side, so that's good. And we have 5 over negative 9 minus 6. That's also going to be just fine. Doesn't cause the denominator to be 0, so this solution is correct. We're going to do it again over here. And so we cross multiply. Yes, we could do some simplification, but since it's as a proportion right now, we can go ahead and multiply. So we get 2x on the right side, and we get 10x plus 20 on the left. And we go ahead and start solving. So I'm going to move the 2x to the other side and get 8x plus 20 is equal to 0. We're going to subtract 20 and get 8x is equal to a negative 20. And then we're going to divide. So we divide by 8. And we end up with x is equal to, let's see, that's the same thing as negative 10 over 4, which is the same thing as negative 5 over 2, which is really just negative 2.5, or negative 5 over 2, whichever way you would like to write it. Okay, and we could plug that in. Since our variables are both in the numerator, though, we don't really have to in this case because we know for sure that it's not going to make the denominator 0. So we're okay in that case. We can always check our solutions, though, to make sure that they are correct. So a couple more examples of this. I'll just do one of these because they're going to look a little bit different. We multiply and we get 12 on the left side. We end up getting x squared minus x on the right. Now this is starting to look like one of those quadratic equations that we looked at the other day. And so I'm going to get my left side equal to 0. So we get 0 is equal to x squared minus x minus 12 because we need to factor and find our solution. So we factor this side and say this is x minus 4 times x plus 3. Remember, we're multiplying to negative 12, adding to a negative 1. And then we can solve to say, well, this first one has to equal 0, and so does this second one, which means x could be 4, or it could be negative 3. Okay? And now we check our solutions, especially in this case when we have two different possibilities. So let's plug in the 4, and we get 4 over 4 is equal to 3 over 4 minus 1. That's okay. We're not going to get 0 as the denominator. And we plug in negative 3, so we get negative 3 over 4 is equal to 3 over negative 3 minus 1, which also works. Not going to get 0 as the denominator. Okay, you can do the same on this next one here with cross multiplication to get 15 is equal to x squared minus 2x. Move it to that right side so we can get it equal to 0, factor, and solve. And then, of course, check your solutions. Now, what if it looks something like this? Well, currently it does not look like a proportion, so we can't cross multiply. but we can use the least common denominator in a couple ways. So what is the least common denominator? Well, between x and 2x, least common denominator is 2x. So what we can do is actually get rid of the denominators by multiplying both sides by 2x. Okay? If we multiply both sides by something, that is legal to do. So on the right side we get 22x, and on the right side what happens is if I take this 2x times 3x, technically we are going to get 6x over x, but really we can just go ahead and simplify the x's to just get 6. The other way I can see it is saying this x up here and this x cancel out, so I'm just doing 2 times 3. And the same for my next rainbow, okay? The 2x and the 2x cancel out, so I just get 16, which means I get 22 here equals 22x, so x really just equals 1. And we can plug it in and see that it's not going to make the denominator 0. Okay, so we can go ahead and use the least common denominator to simplify. This is very similar to when we did this with regular fractions, so that we could get rid of those denominators and just have whole numbers to work with. So let's try that again. In this case, we want to get rid of the 3x and the x, meaning our least common denominator is 3x, so I'm going to multiply each side by that, and I get 18x. And I'm going to simplify here. The 3x and the denominator 3x cancel out, so I just get 9. The x and the x cancel out, so I get 3 times 15, which is 45. So I end up with 54 is equal to 18x. So we can see x is, what, 3? Yeah. All right, so we plug that in and we can see it's not going to make the denominators equal to 0. So we're good to go. All right. So now we have one that's a little bit trickier. We see that we have x minus 1, x, and 2x. Well, between the x and the 2x, least common denominator is 2x. Then you throw in that x minus 1, and we have to realize that we need all of those different factors in there. We need the 2x and we need the x minus 1. So we're going to multiply each term by 2x times x minus 1. So that's what I'm going to put on each side here. 2x times x minus 1. Okay? Now if this is difficult at this point to see all that I'm doing, just write all of this out so that you can see what each term is. But we're going to multiply here. The x minus 1's cancel out, so I really am just doing 2x times 3, which is 6x. Then I'm going to go here. The x's cancel out, which means I'm left taking 2 times x minus 1 times 2, which means I'm going to get minus 4 times x minus 1 equals, once again on the right side, the 2x's cancel out, so I'm going to do 5 times x minus 1. Once again, if you're not seeing all that I'm doing, just write it all out. And then we can expand and simplify to get 6x minus 4x plus 4, remember negative 4 times negative 1, and then we have 5x minus 5. Okay, we start combining, we get 2x plus 4 is equal to 5x minus 5. I'm going to move my x's to the right side by subtraction. 4 equals 3x minus 5. I'm going to add 5 to get 9 is equal to 3x. So x is equal to 3. And we can plug it in and see that none of the denominators will be 0, so we're good to go. Okay? So you can simplify by getting rid of the denominators, getting rid of the fractions by multiplying by the least common denominator. Okay, here is a word problem that we can work on here. It takes Samuel 7 hours to paint a house. It takes Jake 5 hours to paint the same house. How long will it take them together? So, biggest thing here is that we have one house to paint. One house to paint, and we are trying to take how long it takes Samuel to paint it and Jake to paint it, so we're trying to add something together, okay, so that we can paint this one whole house. So how I would set this up is to say, well, it takes Samuel 7 hours to paint the house, okay, so we would take the whole divided by 7 plus how long it takes Jake, which is 5 hours, that's his rate, Okay, this is how I would set it up, which means I can find a least common denominator to multiply by and then go ahead and simplify and solve. Okay, so least common denominator here would be 35, of course. And let me just check to make sure that I'm not missing another way to go about this here. Okay, and honestly, that's biggest thing here. The other way that you could set it up is 1/7 x plus 1/5 x. And of course, that x represents the house. Okay, so we could multiply each side by 35. So that I get 35 is equal to, well, if I expand here, I'm going to get 5x plus 7x. So I get 12x is equal to 35. So we get x is equal to 35 over 12. Okay, so it's just under 3 hours to paint them together. Okay, so you're really setting up the rates equaling one whole house. Here are some other examples that you can work on for yourself. You can, if they're a proportion, like this one, use some cross multiplication. Or if you need some common denominators, make sure that you're using that least common denominator to work through it. Okay? All right, well, I hope this helps for your homework and for studying.